Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about tips for mentally strong people. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm your host for today. My name is Simon, and you are joining me for the second day of our July leadership article. This article is called Healthy Habits That Lead to Success. And yesterday, of course, we talked about time management tips from Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Today, we're moving on to another article. Today's lesson is called 5 Things Mentally Strong Women Know. But if you're a man, don't turn off the program yet. These are good tips for everyone, even though it's written for women. Joining me in the studio today, I have 2 panelists.
That's
Pauline,
right.
Welcome.
Hey, I'm always happy to be here, Simon. I am a woman, so I will be happy to talk about women stuff, I guess, today.
I am so glad that they assigned 2 women to this panel today, because it would be rough if I was here with your husband Josh and with David Morton discussing this women's issues article. So I'm looking forward to the 2 of you taking the lead on this and letting me just sit back and listen to your insights. Our other panelist today, of course, is Manya. Welcome back, Manya.
Thank you, Simon. And like you said, I am a woman too, so thanks for having me here.
I hope you are ready to contribute, because both of you do strike me as mentally strong women, and that's what we're talking about here. Of course, the article's title is 5 Things Mentally Strong Women Know, and so we're basically going to go through 5 tips today. Now, when you hear this term, mentally strong, it's, it's a fairly common term, but what does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's kind of an ambiguous term. There's not like a set way of understanding it, I don't think.
I mean, does it strike you? I suppose the reason I ask this question is because the thing you might guess at immediately is that mentally strong means smart. But that's not really what it means at all. Right?
I assumed they meant confident.
Interesting.
That's sort of my first assumption.
Okay, so I tend to think of mentally strong as meaning like tough, like you're not easily hurt or easily forced to change your mind, or you're kind of like clear about what you want and what you want to do.
I was thinking, tough was a word that came to my mind too, and the other word that came to mind was resilient, like someone who's able to take setbacks and has like a strength about them.
There's been a very popular word in common usage in Western English in the last few years. It's falling a little more out of common use now, but it's the word grit. People were using this word grit. Grit, of course, means like small bits of stone. But the idea is when you describe someone as having grit, it means they're tough, like they're not easily beaten. They don't give up. And I think probably grit is a good way of describing someone who is mentally strong. Like they might not actually be physically strong, they might not be very powerful, but they're not easy to beat because they know what they want and they know what they believe. So like you said, Manya, may be very confident. And so these are 5 things they're saying mentally strong women know. And I think we should probably get right into our first reading here today. Listeners, if you have your Advanced magazine with you, we're looking at page 15 today. It's the lesson for July 4th, 2019. And in our first reading, we're going to read from the left-hand column, again on page 15. We're going to read to about halfway down this column.
Five things mentally strong women know. It's important to talk about the core beliefs mentally strong women possess. Those beliefs guide their decisions and help them stay strong in tough situations. Here are 5 things mentally strong women know. 1. Societal pressures encourage women to engage in unhealthy habits. Gender norms, cultural expectations, and the subtle ways girls are treated differently than boys play a role in women's perceptions of themselves and the world. there's a lot of pressure on women to be a certain way, like beautiful, polite, and quiet. Mentally strong women recognize these pressures and understand how these factors can lead to unhealthy habits, like social comparisons, toxic self-blame, and downplaying their success.
Okay, panelists, our article here starts with a claim. It says it's important to talk about the core beliefs mentally strong women possess. So, two quick questions for you. Why is it important, and who is it important for?
Well, she hasn't convinced me yet that it's important, but she's just telling us it is. So, I'm kind of in a wait and see on that one. And really, she doesn't say who it's important for either. You kind of assume it's important for women to know that, although I don't know why it wouldn't be important for men to recognize that as well.
Yeah, I guess the thing is that mental strength is probably a good thing for anybody who has it, right? And so it's better to be mentally strong than mentally weak, right? And so it's good to know what people do who are successful at something so you can maybe use that to your own advantage. And that's really what we're talking about here. They say the beliefs that these mentally strong women possess guide their decisions and help them stay strong in tough situations. So that's a lot like what we were talking about before, right? Having confidence, and we use that word grit. And so there are 5 things that mentally strong women know. Manya, what's the first one?
The first one says, societal pressures encourage women to engage in unhealthy habits.
Okay, so societal pressures. Pauline, what exactly are societal pressures?
Well, usually it's fairly cultural. It'd be within the culture that you're in. What is the general expectation of a certain group? What is the push? So, for example, in the society that you grew up in, is there strong pressure for you to get married at a certain age, to have kids? If you don't, will there be a lot of questions about that or pushing from other people? That would be an example of a type of social pressure.
So things that society expects people and wants people to do, basically. Mm-hmm. I guess those can be big and small, right? Mm-hmm. Like one societal pressure would be like, don't throw trash on the ground or people will give you dirty looks. Mm-hmm. Right? Another one might be more like if you are 28 and not married yet, you might get a lot of questions at your Chinese New Year dinner from your aunts and things like that and create an uncomfortable situation. So these pressures, they can come in all kinds of ways. But then they use this word, societal pressures encourage women. Usually when we say encourage, it's kind of a positive word, right? Mm. But here it's not necessarily so positive. So why are they using this word encourage?
Because society frames these pressures in a positive way. Like, oh, you should be married at 28 years old or something like that. And it's kind of, it's always put in kind of like a nice way. Mm-hmm. Usually, I would say. I
guess it's also because society doesn't actually force you to do these things, right? Like if you're not married when you're 28, you don't go to jail or you're not forced into some marriage. You're just kind of pressured to do what
it's kind of like a strong
wants.
Suggestion or this constant like push in a certain way.
Okay, but the idea in this first tip is that societal pressures might encourage you to engage in unhealthy habits, right? So they go on here, they use this term, gender norms, cultural expectations, and the subtle ways girls are treated differently than boys play a role in women's perceptions of themselves. So we have a number of things at the beginning there. Mm-hmm. Gender norms. Now, Pauline, you kind of mentioned that, right?
Sure. Gender refers to male and female, right? And norms are the generally accepted behavior for a certain group. So the generally accepted behavior for males and females can be different in different societies and cultures, which goes along with the next one, which is cultural expectations. I think they're very similar. Cultural expectations is broader. Gender norms is specifically about male and female.
Yeah, so cultural expectations, an example of that might mean when you grow up, you should get married and have children, right? A gender expectation or a gender norm might be more specifically something like nursing is a girl job or blue is a boy color. So things that tend to be associated with boys and girls.
Or I was thinking with that, if you take it, like the cultural expectation is you should get married and have kids, but then the gender norm within that culture is the woman is going to stay home with the child and do the primary raising of the child. That would be the gender norm within that bigger cultural expectation or norm.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other thing they say here is these subtle ways girls are treated differently. When you do something subtly, it means you do it like very lightly, very gently. And so I guess the idea here would be like your father wrestled with your brother a lot, but, had tea parties with teddy bears with you. Things like that. So just kind of small differences in the way we treat boys and girls. But the effect here that they're telling us in this article is a negative one. They're saying that this plays a role in women's perceptions of themselves in the world. It affects the way women see the world and think about themselves.
Right. We know from the title that they're going to talk about the negative effects, but I would say that's not necessarily a positive or negative. It can kind of be a neutral, at least in this beginning sentence. You can say it's just true. It's just a general truth that the different ways we're treated are going to generally affect us in different ways. And as we grow up, it'll color the way we see the world and ourselves. That's going to be true just in a individual family all the way out to, the broader society. And that's going to have some things that are really good and some things that probably aren't going to be the greatest. And they're going to focus on some of the things that may not be the healthiest.
Yeah, and so they give some examples here of sort of the way women are taught to think of themselves. Again, I'm not a woman, so you'll have to tell me if this is true or not. But they're saying that basically women are pressured to be a certain way. They say beautiful, polite, and quiet.
It depends on what society you grew up in, what culture you grew up in, and not just like what country or what ethnic group, but then also there's, subcultures within all of that. So your family culture is going to be slightly different, all those different things. So for me, I did not have any pressure to be quiet. Anybody who knows me will say I am not a quiet person. That one doesn't ring true for me. Polite, definitely, although I would have said that it was a similar amount of pressure to be polite from me to my brothers. So I felt like that was a pressure within my culture, especially my Christian culture, that kindness and politeness and niceness was a very strong value, maybe almost over honesty or emotional honesty. But I would never have thought of that as a gender norm. I would have thought of that more about a general social expectation. Beautiful, that's one where I can really understand a broader societal pressure. I don't think I got that from my family. I would say that was a bigger one. And that one definitely, more than the others, I really feel like specifically affects me as a woman way more than it would my brothers or people in my life who are male. Although there still can be that, I think, in some societies more than others.
Okay, so more or less then there are these pressures in society that affect women, but I guess the flip side of that is they also affect men.
Yes.
And I think we would probably agree that there are some positive and some negative aspects to those things. Mm-hmm. But they also agree with that here. They go on in their next paragraph to say, mentally strong women recognize these pressures and understand how these factors can lead to unhealthy habits. So if you're being pressured, it might lead to a positive outcome. But you want to recognize if it is leading you to a negative thing, right? And then they give some examples of that, like social comparisons. So always comparing yourself to other people and feeling bad about that. Toxic self-blame. Now, when something's toxic, it basically means it's poisonous. So you're kind of being the person you are, and you're making yourself feel bad about that. That would be toxic self-blame. And downplaying your success. So doing something well and then feeling like you should be overly humble about it and not feel proud of that success at all. So those would be bad outcomes that people might find themselves pressured into. That brings us to our second reading. Listeners, we're again going to look at page 15 of our magazines. We're going to look at points 2 and 3 at the bottom of the left-hand column and the first couple of lines at the top of the right-hand column. Let's get to that reading now.
Two. Other people don't determine your worth. It's important to build your self-worth on a healthy foundation. It's up to you to decide how you feel about yourself. what you're going to do with your life, and how you're going to bounce back when other people try to tear you down. 3. You don't have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. Owning your success isn't the same as being arrogant. Mentally strong women are comfortable in their own skin, and they're willing to acknowledge the hard work and effort they put in to reach their goals.
Okay, and so we head into the second point here. It says other people don't determine your worth. And when we say your worth here, we really mean your value, but more importantly, they use a term here, self-worth. And so basically that means the way you think about yourself. I guess we could say your confidence, right? Your positive feelings about who you are. Tell me, what does this point exactly talk about, Pauline? It's a hard one, hey? I just threw that whole question at you.
Well, I mean, I would say for one, there is at least a kernel of truth in that, like, your baseline value, your core value as a human being isn't determined by what other people think of you at the moment, criticism, if somebody's treating you like you're worthless. Like, we have a core belief that every human is valuable and worth dignity, and you are, regardless of how you're being treated. And so that's certainly a truth that I think is worth affirming. Although they seem to be taking that a little further, like you said, about like self-confidence. And sometimes we were talking before this panel's discussion started, that, sometimes we do need to hear other people's feedback when there is criticism. It might be something we need to hear and take to heart. And that doesn't mean that you have no value or no self-worth, but maybe your confidence was misplaced in some areas. So, I have kind of mixed feelings about this one.
I really liked the first sentence. They say it's important to build your self-worth on a healthy foundation, and I think that's very true. But sort of defining what a healthy foundation is can be difficult. And I guess, listeners, the reason we are unsure of how to go about this point is that this idea that other people don't determine your worth, it isn't entirely true. And what I mean by that is not that you shouldn't believe in yourself, but we do have to live with other people and get along with other people in society, right? And so if you're always acting selfishly because it's the thing that you want to do, or you're acting in a way that's not trying to help other people out or whatever, because you want to feel better about yourself, it creates a lot of problems for the people around you. And so this idea of having a healthy foundation where you can feel good about yourself, but you can also participate in your community in a way that helps you and your family and the people around you. That's a healthy foundation to me. Do we agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So then they say it's up to you to decide how you feel about yourself. I think that's largely true. And what you're going to do with your life and how you're going to bounce back when other people try to tear you down. So that seems to me to all be pretty good advice. Yeah. Then we go on to the third point. In the third point, it says you don't have to shrink yourself to make other people feel comfortable. Now, when we say shrink something, Manya, what are we doing with it?
You're making something smaller.
Okay, but people cannot get smaller.
Right. They mean kind of on the inside. If you're making yourself kind of smaller and just letting other people take charge.
Like you lose all your confidence,
right,
and so
right.
you're kind of hiding in the corner instead of being the person you really want to be. Okay, so that's when you shrink yourself. So the idea here is you don't have to decide to make yourself smaller or less important to make other people comfortable. Now, Manya, can you tell us, what do they say about this idea?
Well, the author's writing about how you should own your success, and it's not the same as being arrogant. And so you should just be comfortable with what you have and own that, and you don't have to minimize what you have for other people's sake. This,
in some ways, it seems to me a lot like advice that I was given as a younger person, because I grew up in a culture where people are very the term we might use in English is self-effacing, meaning like when someone gives you a compliment, you basically reject the compliment to show you're humble, right? Like somebody says, "Is that a new shirt?" And you say, "Oh, this old thing," right? Or whatever. You don't sort of accept these things that might make you proud because you're supposed to be very focused on becoming humble. That's the idea. But, as I sort of grew older, you come to the point where, it's almost rude sometimes to repeatedly reject compliments. Like you just have to accept a compliment, say thank you, and, move on with that sort of thing, right? And it seems kind of like the same idea to me, right?
Right. I like that they use this phrase to be comfortable in your own skin, and to put that together with them saying, if you think that you're having to downplay your success or give you any kind of praise is going to make other people comfortable. That's not really the case because it shows you're uncomfortable with praise, you're uncomfortable with your level of success, and uncomfortable people make us uncomfortable, right? So if you're just comfortable, you're not feeling the need to push your success forward for praise, but you're also not feeling the need to downplay it and push it down. You're just comfortable. Your comfortableness with just the life as you have it, the successes you've had, and the failures you've had, that will make other people comfortable. That's what really makes people comfortable, is you being comfortable.
Well, and they use this phrase in the first line. They say, owning your success. And that stood out to me because yesterday we were talking, of course, about Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. And they're both very successful people. And you can't really deny that. But if you always try to make your success smaller, you're not able to really help other people out so that they can become successful too, in the way that Warren Buffett was able to explain to Bill Gates how to do time management, right? You need to understand that you are doing it really well and that something about the way you do it might be valuable to other people. And so understanding that doesn't make you arrogant or proud. It just maybe makes you a person who understands what you're good at, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And that, I think, can be a valuable thing. That brings us to our third reading today. Listeners, we're going to look at the right-hand column, points 4, 5, and the little conclusion on page 15 of your magazine. Let's get into that now.
Four, strength sometimes gets confused with weakness. Being vulnerable, kind, and expressing your emotions can be signs of strength, but many people confuse them for weakness. Mentally strong women aren't interested in trying to prove their inner strength to gain applause. Instead, they're invested in growing stronger and becoming better for themselves. 5. Mental strength has a ripple effect. Mental strength has a nice ripple effect because when you feel good about who you are, you'll be in a position to help others feel good too. When you put your energy into becoming the strongest and best version of yourself, other people will naturally feel inspired to do the same. Build your mental muscle. No one is born mentally strong. It's all about the choices you make every day. And fortunately, everyone can choose to develop healthier habits and give up the bad habits that threaten to rob them of mental strength.
Okay, so the fourth point here, strength sometimes gets confused with weakness. This is an interesting idea. In the first little section there, they get into a description of what they mean. They say being vulnerable, kind, and expressing your emotions can be signs of strength, but many people confuse them for weakness. Now, when you're vulnerable, it basically means you're sharing your feelings with other people so they can see what you're really thinking. You're not pretending to be strong and tough and in control if you aren't. So you could almost say being honest about your weaknesses and kind and expressing your emotions, they say these can be signs of strength. And I agree with that in that I think they are definitely signs of confidence. You have to be a very confident person to not be afraid to be honest about your weaknesses and your failings, right?
Kind of goes one way or the other, I feel like. Either you're really confident or you're really, really in a rough emotional space where you're not able to make a decision about that and it's just all coming out, right? So I think you also need to be honest with yourself about whether you're sharing out of a strength and a willingness, you've really made a decision to be vulnerable and to share, or if you're in such a rough emotional state that you're not able to even control when you're vulnerable and when you're not. And that's a pretty important line, I think.
So you're saying we shouldn't Well, being vulnerable and kind and expressing emotions might be signs of strength. You're saying they could also be signs of weakness.
Right.
So you got to be very careful about, and I guess
you just have to be honest with yourself. Are you trying to defend your weakness? Are you being defensive and using this as a kind of a smokescreen to say, no, that's my strength. You're just, or, you just have to be willing to say there's a range here where that can be real strength and people can misunderstand it, and you need to be able to be confident about that and share that. But you also need to be able to take a moment to say, is this a moment of strength or is this a moment of weakness where I wasn't really being intentional about that? And then moving forward.
So you got to understand your motivations to know if you are showing your strength or your weakness when you break down crying in front of your coworkers in the studio. Got
Exactly.
it. I got it. Okay. Point 5 was mental strength has a ripple effect. Now, this term ripple effect, it basically, it's the term we use when we talk about throwing a stone into a pool of water. And you see the little waves, they're called ripples, sort of spreading out from that stone. And I think this idea is kind of like what we were talking about with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, how we were talking about when you own your strengths, meaning you accept your strengths and you understand what you're good at, you can positively affect other people. That's what they say here, right? Mental strength has a nice ripple effect because when you feel good about who you are, you're in a position to help others feel good too. So you can help other people, right?
Right. Well, I personally would not use the words feel good because I feel like feelings come and go. But if you're confident in who you are, that can be really inspiring to other people and can affect them in a really positive way.
I really liked the ending of this article. It wasn't a tip per se, but it's under the subtitle, Build Your Mental Muscle. And I really liked this idea because we often think about building, physical muscles by exercising. But it's important to know that you can build other muscles too. You can build your emotional muscles, I guess, and your mental muscles, build your different abilities basically by exercising them. So they said here, no one is born mentally strong. It's all about the choices you make every day. And I think that is really good advice. What do you guys think about that?
I think it is a really good thing to think about. I think a lot of times we might just say, again, we can use some of this stuff as an excuse to say, well, this is how I am, and I'm valuable, just as I am. But instead of saying this is who I am today, and I'm going to keep growing and figuring out how to become more and more mentally strong and healthy and have that positive momentum forward.
Yeah, so choose things that make you stronger in the long term. Thank you so much for joining us today, listeners, for the second part of our leadership article. We hope you'll join us for another Advanced Studio Classroom. Until then, I'm Simon.
I'm Manya.
This is Pauline.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.